If you don't sign those papers tonight, I'm going to end you right here in your own house. Nobody will even question it. Everyone knows you're losing it over the divorce." Those were the exact words Jake Morrison spoke while standing in my living room, pointing his finger inches from my face. What he didn't know was that I had started recording the moment I saw his truck pull into my driveway. My name is William Taylor. I'm 47 years old, and I've worked as a telecommunications systems engineer for Nexus Corp here in Portland, Oregon, for the past 18 years. In that moment, watching this 28-year-old construction worker threaten me in my own home, I realized my 15-year marriage hadn't just ended. It had been systematically destroyed by two people who thought they were smarter than everyone else. I didn't say a word back to Jake. I just nodded slowly and told him I'd consider it. He smirked, that same arrogant smile I'd seen him give my wife Sarah when he picked her up for their dates while we were still living under the same roof. What he couldn't see was my phone in my shirt pocket, camera lens barely visible, recording everything in 4K clarity. "That's what I thought," he said, walking toward my front door. "You tech nerds are all the same. No backbone when it comes to real men." I thanked him for stopping by and mentioned I'd probably have an answer about the divorce papers by morning. He laughed and slammed the door behind him, his diesel truck roaring to life in a cloud of black smoke. I waited exactly 3 minutes before I stopped recording, saved the file to 3 separate cloud storage accounts, and began what would become the most methodical documentation project of my entire career. Let me back up 6 months to paint the full picture. Sarah and I met at a company picnic in 2009. She was working as an administrative assistant for a law firm downtown, and I was already establishing myself as one of the most reliable engineers in the Pacific Northwest. She was beautiful, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in the technical aspects of my work, something that had always been rare in my dating experience. Our first 5 years together were exactly what I'd always imagined marriage should be. We bought our house on Maple Street in Chuancentos, 2012, a modest 3-bedroom craftsman with a 2-car garage that I converted into my home workshop. Sarah seemed to love the stability I provided. My salary at Nexus had grown to $127,000 annually, and I'd been putting away $2,800 every month into our joint savings account while handling all the major expenses. The first crack appeared in early 2023. Sarah started working late more frequently, which I understood law firms are demanding. But then she began going out with girlfriends on weekends, something she'd rarely done before. When I suggested joining her sometime, she'd always have a reason why it wouldn't work out. "You wouldn't really enjoy it, Will. It's just girl talk and gossip. You'd be bored." I accepted this explanation because I trusted her completely. Trust, I was learning, can be the most expensive mistake a man ever makes. The changes became more obvious in March. Sarah started going to a new gym that was 45 minutes away from our house. Despite there being 3 closer options, she bought new clothes tighter, more revealing outfits that she claimed made her feel confident. Our intimate life, which had admittedly become routine, dropped to virtually nothing. "I'm just stressed with work, honey. You understand?" I did understand. I was working 70-hour weeks myself, managing the installation of a new fiber optic network for 3 major Portland hospitals. Understanding, however, was becoming a one-way street in our marriage. The breakthrough came on April 15th at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was working from home, testing network configurations in my garage workshop, when I heard Sarah's car pull into the driveway. This was unusual. She never came home for lunch, and her job was too far away to make it practical. I was about to go greet her when I heard a second vehicle arrive. Through my workshop window, I watched a lifted Ford F-250 with oversized tires parked behind her sedan. A young guy with sleeve tattoos and a construction company logo on his t-shirt climbed out. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the confident swagger as he walked up to my wife. They didn't go into the house. Instead, they stood beside his truck for exactly 11 minutes, I timed it, having what appeared to be an intense conversation. At one point he pulled her close and kissed her. Not a friendly peck. A deep, possessive kiss that lasted long enough for me to process what I was witnessing. I didn't confront them. Something in my engineering training kicked in. When you discover a system failure, you don't fix the first problem you see. You map the entire network to understand how deep the corruption goes. I installed a discreet security camera system that afternoon, nothing illegal or invasive, just monitoring of my own property's driveway and front entrance. The cameras were professional grade, the same ones we used for securing telecommunications equipment installations. High resolution, night vision, motion activated with automatic cloud backup. Within 2 weeks, I had documented 17 separate visits. Jake, I'd figured out his name from his truck's company decals, was coming to my house 3 to 4 times per week while I was at work. The visits lasted anywhere from 40 minutes to 2 hours, but the real revelation came when I started reviewing our financial records. As a systems engineer, I've always been meticulous about documentation and data analysis. That's not paranoia, it's professional habit. Every month I reconciled all our accounts, credit cards, and expenses in a detailed spreadsheet. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Starting in January 2023, there had been irregularities. Cash withdrawals of $400–600 every 2 weeks from our joint account, charges at restaurants I'd never been to, on days when Sarah claimed to be working late. Hotel charges in Vancouver, Washington, just across the Columbia River appearing monthly, since February. The most damaging discovery was in her email, which I legally accessed through our shared family computer. Sarah had been sloppy with her digital security, keeping everything logged in from our home desktop. I found emails between Sarah and her sister Jennifer, dating back to December 2022. In them, Sarah outlined her entire plan. Will is so predictable and trusting. He'll never see this coming. Jake makes me feel alive again, and he's willing to wait while I figure out how to maximize what I get from the divorce. Will's been putting money away for years. There's got to be at least $200K in various accounts, plus his share of the house equity. If I play this right, I can start fresh with Jake and have enough money to really enjoy life. Jennifer's responses were even worse. You deserve to be happy, Sarah. Will is a nice guy, but he's boring. Jake sounds like he knows how to treat a woman. Just be careful about the timeline. You want to make sure you get the maximum settlement before he figures out what's happening. There were 43 emails in this thread. 43 emails documenting a conspiracy to defraud me of everything I'd worked to build over nearly 2 decades. I printed every single one, saved them to encrypted drives, cross-referenced them with my financial records and security camera footage. By May 15th, I had built a file that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. But I wasn't ready to move yet. In my line of work, timing is everything. Install a network component too early, and it won't integrate properly with existing systems. Move too late, and you risk cascading failures. I needed to understand the full scope of their plan before I could execute my response. I started varying my schedule, coming home at unexpected times, taking different routes through the neighborhood. What I discovered was that Jake wasn't just visiting for affairs. He was systematically cataloging everything in our house. One afternoon in late May, I watched through my camera feed as Jake walked through our home with Sarah, pointing at furniture, electronics, and artwork. He spent 15 minutes in my workshop, taking pictures of my tool collection with his phone. Tools I'd accumulated over 20 years, many of them specialized telecommunications equipment worth $30,000 or more. That evening, Sarah casually mentioned that she was thinking about redecorating. Some of this furniture is just so outdated, don't you think? Maybe we should get appraisals on some of these pieces, see what it might cost to update our style. I agreed it was a good idea and suggested we start with my workshop equipment, since I knew those values off the top of my head. The look that flashed across her face lasted only a second, but I caught it. Panic. Oh, that's probably not necessary. I was thinking more about the living room furniture. By June, I had enough evidence to end this situation 10 different ways. But Jake was about to make a critical error that would transform my solid documentation into a criminal case. The divorce papers appeared on our kitchen counter on a Monday morning in early June. Sarah presented them as if she'd been wrestling with the decision for months. Will, I think we both know this isn't working anymore. We've grown apart. I think it's time we considered separating. I read through the documents that evening. Sarah had filed for a no-fault divorce, but her financial demands were breathtaking in their audacity. She wanted 75% of our joint assets, including the house, claiming that her emotional labor throughout the marriage entitled her to additional compensation beyond Oregon's standard 50-50 community property split. She was asking for $3,200 monthly in spousal support for 6 years. She wanted my entire workshop equipment collection, claiming it was household property. Most insulting of all, she was demanding I pay her attorney fees of $15,000, plus court costs. If I'd agreed to these terms, Sarah would have walked away with approximately $340,000 in cash and assets, while I'd be left with my salary, debt from attorney fees, and the privilege of paying her over $23,000 per year in ongoing support. "I hope we can handle this amicably," she said. "I've talked to my attorney, and she says if we both agree to the terms, this can all be finalized within 60 days. I told her I'd need some time to review everything with my own attorney. This was when her mask started to slip. "Time? Well, I don't think dragging this out benefits either of us. My attorney says the longer these things take, the more expensive and messy they become." There was an edge in her voice I'd never heard before, not sadness or regret about our marriage ending, but irritation that I wasn't immediately capitulating to her demands. "I understand, Sarah. I just want to make sure I understand all the implications. Surely you can give me a few weeks to process this." She agreed, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. That evening she was on the phone with someone for over an hour, speaking in hushed tones from our bedroom. 3 days later, Jake showed up at my house at 8:30 p.m. I was in my workshop, organizing equipment and updating my inventory spreadsheets, when I heard his diesel truck in the driveway. Through the window, I watched him climb out and walk toward my front door with the aggressive stride of a man who thought he was in control of the situation. This was the moment I'd been preparing for. I slipped my phone into my chest pocket, activated the recording app, and went to answer the door. "Jake, right? Sarah's mentioned you." He pushed past me into the living room like he owned the place. "Where is she?" "At her sister's house for the evening. Is everything okay?" He turned to face me, and I could see he'd been drinking. Not stumbling. Drunk, but enough to make him bold and sloppy. "Look, man, I'm going to be straight with you. Sarah and I are together now. She's been trying to handle this divorce thing nice and clean, but you're dragging your feet. That needs to stop." I kept my voice level and curious. "I'm sorry, but I'm not sure what you mean. Together how?" Jake laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "Don't play stupid. You think I haven't been watching this situation? Sarah's been with me for months. She's done with this marriage, done with this boring-ass life you've built here." "I see. And you felt like you needed to come tell me this personally." "Yeah, I did, because apparently you're not getting the message." He stepped closer, and I could smell beer and cigarettes on his breath. "She's filed the papers. The terms are more than fair, hell, they're generous. You need to sign them and move on." I nodded thoughtfully. "And if I don't?" This was when Jake made the statement that would destroy his life. "If you don't sign those papers tonight, I'm going to end you right here in your own house. Nobody will even question it. Everyone knows you're losing it over the divorce." I let that hang in the air for a moment. "You're threatening to kill me if I don't sign divorce papers. I'm telling you that accidents happen to stubborn people. You're a small guy, and this can go easy or hard. Your choice." He wasn't done. Jake spent another 5 minutes outlining exactly how he would make my life miserable. Slashing my tires, vandalizing my workshop, showing up at my workplace to have conversations with my boss about my personal problems. "Sarah told me, you're one of those guys who can't handle confrontation. Prove her wrong if you want, but I promise you'll regret it." When he finally left, I had 17 minutes of high-definition video showing a man making explicit death threats and promises of criminal harassment, all in the context of coercing me to sign legal documents under duress. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spent 8 hours organizing all my evidence into a comprehensive file. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to downtown Portland. My first stop was the office of Catherine Reeves, an attorney who specialized in high-asset divorces and had a reputation for aggressive advocacy. Catherine reviewed my evidence for 2 hours. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair and whistled softly. "Will, in 15 years of practicing family law, I have never seen documentation this thorough. Your wife and her boyfriend have committed multiple felonies, and they've handed you everything you need to prove it." She explained that Jake's threats constituted criminal menacing under Oregon law, enhanced by the fact that they were made to coerce the signing of legal documents. The combination could result in charges ranging from coercion to extortion. Sarah's emails with her sister documented conspiracy to commit fraud. Her systematic concealment of assets and the affair, while making financial demands, constituted grounds to void any claim to spousal support. More importantly, Catherine said, Oregon has a statute allowing courts to award a disproportionate share of community property when one spouse has committed economic misconduct. Between the hidden expenses for her affair and the attempted fraud, we can argue she should receive little to nothing. My second stop was the Portland Police Bureau. Detective Michelle Torres reviewed Jake's threats and immediately recognized them as criminal menacing in the first degree. This is a clear-cut case, she said. He's threatening serious physical injury to coerce you into signing legal documents. We can have a warrant within hours. I asked her to wait 48 hours before making any arrests. I had one final piece of business to handle. That evening, Sarah came home excited and optimistic. Will, I've been thinking about our conversation the other night. I know this is hard, but I really think we should try to finalize everything quickly. It's better for both of us. I told her I'd been thinking the same thing. Actually, I'd like to have a conversation with you and Jake together. Clear the air, make sure we're all on the same page about expectations going forward. Sarah's eyes lit up. This was clearly better than she'd hoped for. That's very mature of you. Will, I think Jake would appreciate that too. He's been worried about potential drama. We arranged for Jake to come over Thursday evening. Just a calm, adult conversation about how to move forward, I assured her. Thursday at 7 p.m., Jake arrived in his usual style, diesel engine roaring, music too loud. But this time he walked into my house with confidence instead of aggression. Sarah had clearly told him that I was ready to surrender. Will, good to see you again. He actually extended his hand for a shake. Sarah says you want to talk things through like adults. I respect that. I shook his hand and invited them both to sit in the living room. I had prepared coffee for everyone, served on our best china with Sarah's favorite cookies arranged on a decorative plate. Just like the civilized conversation I'd promised. I want you both to know that I've spent a lot of time thinking about this situation, I began, and I've come to some important conclusions. Sarah reached over and squeezed my arm. Will, I know this is hard, but I think you'll find that moving forward is going to be the best thing for everyone. You're absolutely right, Sarah. Moving forward is exactly what we need to do. I pulled out a manila folder and set it on the coffee table, but before we do that, I want to make sure we're all being completely honest with each other. I opened the folder and pulled out the first photograph, Jake and Sarah kissing beside his truck. In my driveway, timestamp clearly visible. This was taken on April 15th at 2:28 p.m. Sarah, you told me you were working late that day. Sarah's face went white. Jake leaned forward to look at the photo, his confident expression beginning to shift. Now, I understand that marriages end and people find new relationships. What I don't understand is the deception. I laid out the next series of photos, showing Jake visiting my house multiple times per week over a span of months. These represent documented visits between January and June of this year, 17 separate occasions when Jake was at our house while I was at work. Sarah found her voice first. Will, I can explain. Please don't interrupt, Sarah. I'm not finished. I pulled out printed copies of her email exchanges with her sister. These emails outline your plan to maximize what you get from the divorce while you figure out how to start fresh with Jake. Jake was reading over her shoulder, and I watched his face change as he realized the scope of what Sarah had documented in writing. You discuss my predictability, my trustworthiness, and your strategy for extracting $200,000 plus house equity from our marriage. Your sister Jennifer provides advice on timing the revelation of your affair to maximize your financial settlement. I placed the financial records on the table. Bank statements highlighted in yellow, credit card bills, hotel receipts. These show systematic deception of our joint finances. Cash withdrawals totaling $8,400 over 6 months. Hotel charges in Vancouver. Restaurant bills for dates I never attended. You've been funding your affair with our joint savings account while planning to demand 75% of our assets in the divorce. Sarah was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic from someone whose careful plan was collapsing. Will, you don't understand. Things just happened. It wasn't planned like this. Sarah, I have 43 emails that say otherwise. Emails where you discuss my boring personality, my predictable nature, and your excitement about starting a new life with Jake, using the money you're going to extract from our marriage. Jake finally spoke up. Look, man, Sarah and I, we didn't mean for it to happen this way, but what's done is done. You still need to move forward. I smiled at him. You're absolutely right, Jake. What's done is done. Which brings me to my favorite piece of evidence. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. Jake, do you remember our conversation Monday evening, when you came here to discuss my timeline for signing the divorce papers? His face went completely pale. What conversation? I pressed play. If you don't sign those papers tonight, I'm going to end you right here in your own house. Nobody will even question it. Everyone knows you're losing it over the divorce. Jake's voice filled my living room, clear and unmistakable. Sarah stared at him in horror as the recording continued with his detailed threats about slashing my tires, vandalizing my property, and making my life miserable. Sarah told me, you're one of those guys who can't handle confrontation. Prove her wrong if you want, but I promise you'll regret it. When the recording finished, the silence in my living room was absolute. Jake, I said conversationally, that recording documents multiple felonies. Criminal menacing in the first degree carries a sentence of up to 10 years in Oregon. Coercion, extortion, and harassment are additional charges. I've already shared this with the Portland Police Bureau. Jake jumped to his feet. You can't. That's not legal. You can't record someone without their permission. Actually, Jake, Oregon is a one-party consent state for audio recording. Since I was a participant in our conversation, I was legally entitled to record it. More importantly, recordings of criminal threats are admissible evidence regardless of consent laws. Sarah was looking back and forth between us like she was watching a tennis match. Will, surely we can work this out. You don't need to involve the police. Sarah, the police are already involved. Detective Torres has issued a warrant for Jake's arrest. They're waiting for my call. Jake's bravado crumbled completely. Look, I was drinking that night. I didn't mean those things literally. It was just guy talk, blowing off, steam. I'm going to end you right here in your own house isn't guy talk, Jake. It's a death threat, made in the context of coercing me to sign legal documents that would cost me over $300,000. I stood up and walked to the window. Detective Torres estimates you'll be looking at 8 to 10 years minimum, given that this is threat-enhanced coercion with a financial motive. Oregon takes these cases very seriously. Sarah grabbed Jake's arm. We need to leave. We need to go right now. I turned back to face them. Sarah, sit down. You're not going anywhere until we finish discussing your situation. Something in my voice made her stop. For the first time in our entire marriage, I was the one in control of the conversation. Your situation is actually more complex than Jake's. He's looking at criminal charges for threatening me. You're looking at criminal charges for conspiracy to commit fraud. Plus, you've destroyed your position in our divorce. I pulled out the revised divorce papers Catherine had prepared. Oregon law allows courts to award a disproportionate share of community property when one spouse commits economic misconduct. Between funding your affair with our joint funds and attempting to defraud me of our assets, you've given the court grounds to award you essentially nothing. Sarah read the first page of the new filing. Her face went from white to grey. This can't be legal. I'm entitled to half of everything we built together. You were entitled to half, Sarah, until you decided to steal from our joint accounts to fund your affairs and then conspire to defraud me of my assets. Now you're entitled to whatever a judge thinks you deserve after reviewing evidence of your misconduct. The new divorce filing awarded Sarah 15% of our community assets, no spousal support, and required her to pay both attorney fees as compensation for the fraud attempt. Instead of walking away with $340,000, she'd be looking at roughly $30,000 and a requirement to pay $25,000 in legal costs. Jake was reading over her shoulder again. Sarah, how is this possible? It's possible because you two got greedy and sloppy. I collected all my evidence and put it back in the folder. If Sarah had simply filed for a straightforward divorce, she would have received half of everything, free and clear. Instead, she decided to maximize her payout through deception and fraud. Sarah was crying harder now. Will, please, we can fix this. I'll call off the divorce. We can go to counseling. Sarah, you spent 6 months systematically betraying our marriage, stealing our joint funds, and planning to defraud me with your boyfriend's help. When I didn't immediately surrender to your demands, he threatened to murder me. Which part of this situation do you think counseling is going to fix? Jake made one last attempt at negotiation. What if I apologize? What if we both apologize and just start over with the original divorce terms? I walked to my front door and opened it. The original divorce terms were based on a good faith filing from someone I trusted. That person doesn't exist anymore. The new terms reflect the reality of who you both actually are. As they gathered their things to leave, I had one final piece of business. Jake, Detective Torres asked me to mention that they'll be looking for you tomorrow morning. You can turn yourself in voluntarily, or they can come. Find you. Your choice. He stopped at my doorway. 10 years seems like a lot for just words. Those weren't just words, Jake. That was a death threat made to coerce me into signing documents that would have cost me $340,000. The district attorney's office considers that armed robbery without the weapon. After they left, I sat in my living room for an hour, trying to process what had just happened. 20 months of marriage had ended with my wife attempting to defraud me and her. Boyfriend threatening to kill me when I didn't cooperate quickly enough. But something had shifted inside me during those months of documentation and preparation. I wasn't the same trusting, predictable man Sarah had described in her emails. I'd learned that sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply holding people accountable for their own choices. Jake turned himself in the next morning. The district attorney's office, armed with clear video evidence of explicit threats, offered him a plea arrangement. 8 years for criminal menacing in the first degree, with the coercion and harassment charges dropped. Given that a conviction at trial could have resulted in 12 years, he accepted. Sarah's divorce proceeded exactly as my attorney had projected. The judge reviewed the evidence of affair-related expenditures and the attempted coercion, and was unimpressed with her claims of entitlement to extra compensation. Mrs. Taylor, you systematically deceived your husband about your relationship, spent joint marital funds on your affair, and attempted to coerce him into an inequitable settlement through threats of violence from your boyfriend. This court sees no reason to reward that behavior. The final divorce decree awarded Sarah $28,500 in assets and required her to pay $23,000 in attorney fees for both sides. She also received a formal reprimand from the court for filing a frivolous and fraudulent financial disclosure. 3 months. Later, my life had settled into a new rhythm that was infinitely better than my marriage had been. I'd been promoted to senior systems engineer at Nexus, with a salary increase to $145,000. My workshop was back to being my sanctuary instead of something I was afraid of losing. I sold the house on Maple Street and bought a smaller place on the east side of Portland with mountain views and a larger garage for my equipment collection. The profit paid off all the legal expenses and gave me a fresh start in a place with no difficult memories. Most importantly, I'd learned that I was far more capable of protecting myself than I'd ever imagined. The quiet, trusting, predictable man Sarah had thought she could manipulate turned out to be someone who could outthink, outplan, and outmaneuver people who thought they were smarter than everyone else. 6 months after Jake began his sentence, Sarah moved back in with her parents in Eugene. She'd burned through her settlement money. Quickly and without spousal support, she was struggling to maintain her lifestyle. Her sister Jennifer, who had been so encouraging about the fraud plan, stopped taking her calls after Sarah asked to borrow money. I heard through mutual friends that Sarah had been telling people I was vindictive for not agreeing to her original divorce terms. This gave me a deep satisfaction. She still didn't understand that she was facing the consequences of her own choices, not my revenge. The truth is, I didn't need revenge. I just needed to be smarter than 2 people who thought they could outsmart everyone else. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be a victim. Last month, I ran into Sarah at a grocery store in Portland. She looked older, tired, and was shopping with coupons clipped from newspaper ads. When she saw me, she approached cautiously. "Will, you look good. Healthy." I thanked her and asked how she was doing. "I'm managing. Things have been challenging since everything happened." She paused, looking like she wanted to say something else. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we'd handled things differently?" I considered the question seriously. "Sarah, I think what happened was exactly what both of you chose. Jake chose to threaten me rather than convince me. You chose to steal from our joint accounts and plan a fraud rather than file an honest divorce petition. I chose to document everything and protect myself rather than trust people who had proven untrustworthy. She nodded slowly. I suppose that's one way to look at it. It's the only way to look at it. You both had dozens of opportunities to make different choices. Every email you sent, every dollar you stole, every lie you told was a choice. Jake had choices too, right up until he decided to threaten my life. As I drove home from that encounter, I reflected on something my father had told me when I was young. The most dangerous people in the world aren't the ones who threaten you loudly. They're the ones who smile while they're planning to destroy you. Sarah and Jake had smiled while plotting to steal over $300,000 from me. They'd made love in my house while discussing how to maximize their fraud. They'd planned my financial destruction while I cooked dinner and asked about their days. But in the end, their own arrogance defeated them. They got sloppy because they thought they were dealing with someone who would never fight back effectively. Sarah kept detailed written records of her fraud planning. Jake made explicit threats while I was legally recording him. They defeated themselves by underestimating the quiet, predictable, boring man they thought they knew. These days, I'm dating a woman named Rebecca, who works as a forensic accountant for the state of Oregon. She finds my attention to detail attractive rather than boring. When I showed her the evidence files I'd built during my divorce, her response was immediately supportive. "Will, this is incredible work. You documented everything correctly, preserved chain of custody, cross-referenced multiple sources. You could have worked in law enforcement. We're taking things slowly, but there's something refreshing about being with someone who values methodical thinking and careful analysis. Someone who understands that boring, predictable people are often the ones who build stable, trustworthy lives worth sharing." Rebecca asked me recently whether I was angry about everything that had happened with Sarah and Jake. Angry? No, not anymore. Grateful, maybe. Grateful. Sarah did me a favor by showing me who she really was before I wasted any more years with her. Jake did me a favor by being stupid enough to threaten me on camera. They both taught me that I'm much stronger and more capable than I'd ever known. I paused, thinking about how to explain it. I spent 15 years trying to be the husband I thought Sarah wanted. Turns out she wanted someone else entirely. Now I get to find out who I actually am when I'm not trying to be someone else's idea of the perfect partner. Rebecca smiled. "And who are you?" "Someone who pays attention. Someone who documents everything. Someone who thinks before acting and acts decisively when thinking is done. Someone who doesn't make threats, but keeps promises." I took her hand. "Apparently someone who's much more interesting than I thought I was." The last I heard, Jake still has 4 years left on his sentence. Prison records show he's been written up multiple times for fighting and disrespecting guards. Apparently, the confidence he showed when threatening me doesn't translate well to environments where other people aren't intimidated by diesel trucks and tough guy posturing. Sarah is working part-time at a department store and living in a studio apartment in Eugene. Her social media posts suggest she's dating someone new, a guy who works in restaurant management. I hope for both their sakes that she's learned something from the experience. As for me, I've been promoted again at Nexus, now earning $165,000 as a senior project manager overseeing fiber optic installations across the Pacific Northwest. My work involves managing complex technical projects, coordinating multiple teams, and solving problems that require patience and systematic analysis. Turns out, I'm very good at this type of work. More importantly, I've learned that interesting isn't the same as loud and boring isn't the same as weak. The same qualities that Sarah found: predictable attention to detail, systematic thinking, careful planning, are exactly what allowed me to outmaneuver two people who thought they were smarter and tougher than me. Sometimes I wonder how different things might have been if Sarah had simply been honest about wanting a divorce, or if Jake had encouraged her to handle things ethically instead of threatening me when their fraud timeline was inconvenient. But then I remember that people like Sarah and Jake don't think about ethics or honesty when they're focused on what they want. They think about manipulation, shortcuts, and intimidation. They count on their victims being too scared, too confused, or too trusting to fight back effectively. The recording that destroyed Jake's life was 17 minutes long. 17 minutes of him being exactly who he actually was when he thought he was in control of the situation. It wasn't revenge that sent him to prison for 8 years. It was his own words, his own choices, his own actions recorded in perfect clarity. Sarah's emails destroyed her divorce case in the same way. Nobody forced her to write detailed descriptions of her fraud planning. She did that herself, got sloppy with her digital security, and left a perfect trail of evidence for me to find. In the end, I didn't destroy my marriage. Sarah did that when she decided to systematically betray it while planning to maximize her financial gain. I didn't send Jake to prison. He did that when he chose to threaten my life rather than convince me with reason. I just refused to be their victim. Sometimes that's all the revenge a situation requires.